I know you're Bannon's guy, but this latest news about you is concerning. Voters in Alabama will never elect someone who's had relations with a minor.
You sure about that?
No. Alabama is quite a place, but we can't take chances.
I mean, Mike, look, it's all lies. I'm not that guy.
Perhaps, Roy, perhaps. But it's hard to convince people that you're not into young girls when you dress like Woody from Toy Story.
Saturday Night Live having a field day with Roy Moore. He, the Republican candidate for Senate, who is facing growing calls to drop out of the race. And it's not just on partisan lines by any means. He's been accused by multiple women of either trying to sexually assault them or trying to date them while he was in his 30s, and they were as young as 14. SNL had some jokes at his expense. Moore himself also trying to make light of the whole thing. Here he is speaking at an Alabama church.
Obviously, I've made a few people mad. I'm the only one that can unite Democrats and Republicans, because I seem to be opposed by both.
Funny guy. Then he played, as you'd expect, the religion card.
This is not just a battle for Democrats and Republicans and how they vote on issues. This is a spiritual battle.
But a growing number of Republicans are not buying what Moore is selling. The Republican National Committee pulling money as well as support for Moore. Top Republicans in Congress, they want him to pull out. That would be House Speaker Paul Ryan, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and a growing number of others. McConnell, just one of at least 15 Senate Republicans who want Moore out of the race. Many others in the GOP have either pulled endorsements or said if the allegations are proven, he ought to drop out. This is hardly just about politics, though. It's also about the rule of law. That's what I wanted to talk to guys at the table about. Moore has a lengthy but checkered legal resume. He was Chief Justice on the Alabama State Supreme Court not once but twice. Why, you ask? Well, because he was forced out not once but twice. The first time was when he refused to remove a granite Ten Commandments monument from the courthouse, even though multiple courts ruled it shockingly a violation of church and state. Second time, he was forced to leave the bench after he ordered judges not to enforce federal law. Gay marriage ruling after the U.S. Supreme Court said that it was the law of the land. Judge Moore was suspended, then resigned. So Moore has a history of violating the rule of law. He's also been on the wrong side of some unbelievable decisions, including the case of a 17-year-old convicted of sexually assaulting a 4-year-old. It went all the way to the state Supreme Court, a court that Moore presided over, and an 8-1 decision upheld the conviction. The dissenting judge, you guessed it, Roy Moore. I want you to read, or share with you, part of his argument. Again, this is a 17-year-old raping a 4-year-old. Quote, "Because there was no evidence in this case of an implied threat of serious physical injury or of an implied threat of death, Higdon cannot be convicted of sodomy in the first degree." As if that's not creepy and disturbing enough, Moore reportedly banned, I want you to think about this, a grown man who was an assistant district attorney. He was banned from an Alabama mall because he hung out there badgering teenage girls. And finally, an ADA who used to work with him when he was deputy district attorney says it was well known, or common knowledge as she put it, that Moore was inappropriate at best with girls. And you wonder sometimes why people don't speak up. But beyond the ick factor here, there's a rule of law. Who is anyone to decide that they're going to defy federal law? And by the way, I can point out to a few times that Alabama has done that. But anyway, in modern times. And then secondly, that decision, that dissenting opinion that he gave, that a 4-year-old, because she couldn't prove that she could have died or been harmed by being raped, I know we don't disqualify people for thoughts this way, but there should be some disqualifiers, I think, if you won't even uphold the rule of law and you're supposedly an officer of the court.
Mr. Moore is not the first public official who has issues with morality You know, I like to compare sometimes our system to Animal Farm, where all animals are equal and some are more equal than
I'm
others.
talking about the enforcement of the law, Mayo, not just strange thoughts going on in his attic and his brain here. I'm talking about enforcing or not enforcing rule
You
of
touched
law.
on it earlier, though. I mean, if you have an assistant district attorney who worked with him and suspected that this guy was a pedophile, what in the world is she doing? Why is she sitting there and not asking that this guy be terminated, not seeking an investigation?
I might be able to answer my own question. Clearly, enough people thought enough of him, not once, but twice, to make him the state Supreme Court judge.
Yeah, but and you take that oath, okay, as an attorney, doctor, you know, a whole bunch of people take oaths to uphold the law. Police officers do, firefighters take oaths. You know, if I'm a firefighter and I know you're a firefighter with me and you're setting fires, I got to stop you from doing that. So too often, you know, we get down the road where I understand why an accuser may come up 20 or 30 years later, you know, and lots of people don't, but I understand that. I don't understand how somebody who's sworn to prosecute crime sits there and allows that to happen.
And you know, Nick, for me, the other thing is, if you're caught as a cop on the take, or a firefighter decides on the side to set fires or whatever, you can never wear a badge again or be a member of a fire department. Somehow, some way, it's acceptable to come back on the bench when you refuse to uphold federal law, let alone, you know, just to me, it seems that we've got out of whack which positions we're going to hold certain standards for and not. And listen, I cover politics for a living here. I mean, when the Marion Barrys of the world and many of their ilk can get their jobs back after being, you know, convicted of felonies and all the rest, somehow that bar has been lowered again. It's a different conversation. But I don't know, in your guys' world, really? You're going to disregard a federal law, and that makes it, and you're now qualified to be back on the bench?
So I think you got your arms around a really big, important question, and it's a reason why I'm optimistic about how this is all going to play out across the country. So first, with respect to Judge Moore, I mean, this is Forrest Gump meets Psycho. I mean, it's a special case, it's abhorrent, it's indescribable. And if you're interested, we can talk a little bit about the Senate rules, which is really the Republicans' worst nightmare, because he's got a reasonable chance of being elected. But first, get back to your point. And your point, what I believe is that this forced, very unpleasant national conversation we're having about exploitation, sexual assault, discrimination based on gender and sex, this is, if we sustain it, going to improve behavior. It's going to demonstrate and teach us that abhorrent behavior is not acceptable. Now, Mrs. Allard, my mother, did not bring up naive children. I know, for example, I was just reading about Maureen O'Hara, the great actress in 1942, how she was ostracized for not playing along with the casting couch. So there's no new thing under the sun. Ecclesiastes 1:9. There's no new thing under the sun. But I've got to believe that there are more people in this great country who do not accept, do not tolerate the kind of behavior that we've been hearing about and talking about that's exploding, thanks in part to social media and the mass media, and for shows like yours that are causing this conversation.
I do think that we are getting there in a national dialogue. In fact, later on this week, we're going to talk about with a guest who does this for a living in sexual crimes and prosecuting them, where we go next from here. But Doug, it's interesting because no one's talking about the other person on the ballot, Doug Jones. Alabamans have a choice. Doug Jones, he's fought the KKK. He prosecuted in that Birmingham church bombing. It's going to be interesting where this is, and I will be buoyed a little bit. Everybody thinks that this guy doesn't have a chance here and that Roy Moore is going to win. New polling came out late this afternoon that it has Moore down as much as 10 to 12 points. I don't know how it'll turn out, but again, for me, I just have a higher standard or expectation, and we'll get in this debate next segment too, as to what officers of the court should be expected to do, where you don't get to pick and choose which laws you want to uphold and then have a right to be back on the ballot again to represent the entire state as a Chief Justice, for Christ's sake. I don't even know that you should be able to vote on these guys. It should be an appointing position. That's a different debate. But to me, shouldn't we have higher standards?
Well, should we have higher standards? Yes. I'm going to do 180 degrees on you, though. You know, Rich, he is the candidate. He's running for an office that he won a primary. The people actually said, we want him to represent. This information they have right now, we as lawyers, we believe in due process, and these people are coming forward and their stories are compelling. But if you take this kind of clownish character and take him out of these facts, you're really setting up a situation where going forward in the future, there's a template where people can come out after a primary when you're not satisfied with the candidate, and you can kind of sandbag them at that point.
You know what? I think you're right, and I also think there's a conversation, and my fear is that there will be allegations that will be disproven by women coming forward, and then somehow people think it'll mitigate the debate here, which, as you guys know, bad case makes bad law. But I do think this isn't a criminal investigation of Roy Moore. This is about somebody, it's a privilege, not a right to hold an elected office. This is information the electorate should have and be able to make their own decisions with it. I just don't think this guy should be on a ballot, or let alone been allowed to wear the robe on multiple occasions, but for another night. All right, coming up next, the private lives of public figures. All of these guys have been prosecutors, and I'm curious where they fall on this one. A Dallas ADA reams out an Uber driver, and it's all caught on tape, and don't worry, I'll show you the video. Should it be a fireable offense? She wasn't on work hours when she did it. We're going to take a look at whether that was an overreaction or due justice. Stay with us.